Now we can continue with our forms. And one thing I want to mention is when you position your cursor inside of one of these text fields or in the text area, you'll notice a couple of things. Down at the bottom in your properties window, it'll give you information about the ID associated with it, but you'll also see things here like char width, which actually stands for character width, and maximum characters. As well, the option of making that text field be a single line, a multi-line, or even a password field. So let me show you a little bit about that. If I were to say character width of 20 and I press enter, you'll see that it's shortened it a little bit. So let's extend that. What if I wanted, say, 40 and then press return? You can see that that's extended a lot larger. Same with this one. If I were to say something like character of 40, now the maximum characters, well, let's say 40 as well. We can say maximum characters for this one being 40 as well. That should look okay. Now here in the email, I'll do the same thing. Let's say 40 characters. Well, actually, well, we'll leave it at 40 just to make it consistent. And maximum characters 40 as well. Now here you can give an initial value, and an initial value means, like, before you enter in any information, is there something you would like me to have visible inside one of these fields? So for example, here where it says first name, you could write in something like your name. But we don't really need to do that, although I just want to show you what it looks like. I don't really need to do that simply because, well, with a label of first name, it's pretty obvious what you want them to put in here. But nevertheless, if you did want to, you could enter that information here. Now, also, multi-line is not really something that we usually do with first name, although you could if you wanted to. That's something that we're going to do with the comments area. Nevertheless, though, if this was, say, a password field, and if I was to just click on password, notice what happens. Instead of having normal alphanumeric characters here, what you end up with are just these little circles. So anytime somebody comes in here and starts writing something, all they'll see are circles. You've probably had to use a few password fields in your day as well, so I'm sure you get the understanding of what it does. It also gives you the opportunity to apply classes, but we're going to be talking about styling these things in a video a little later on. So I'm going to remove that, and I'll just bring that back to single line. Now if we select the area where the comments are, notice that right now it's set to multi-line. Perfect, that's exactly what I want to do. But the character width, I want to maybe extend this even more. How about something like 80? See how large that got? Now, although this is not exactly what I intended, it's pushed it down because there's not enough room for both of these elements, and that's actually a good thing because that's what I want to see later on. But we'll do that with CSS for the rest of the items. Now for the number of lines, I could also come in here and say, like, let's say 10 lines worth, so that's extended it, made it a lot bigger. Now that I see this here, though, I'm going to select the comments and just put a little colon in there just so that we can have it consistent with the rest of the items. So that's a little bit about styling those elements. But before we move on, let's see about adding some other things. So right next to this comment text area here, I'm going to ask you to press return. So now that I've got my paragraph right here in the correct position, I'm going to go to the inserts, and we have options. Now we could insert either one checkbox or an entire checkbox group, and we could do the same thing with radio buttons or one radio group. I think what I want to do is to just create the simple checkbox first, and we'll create one or two of those, and then I'll show you what the grouping is for the radio group. So let's imagine here a checkbox with an ID, and let's just call it HTML. The label will be HTML as well, but I'm going to capitalize this, and we're going to use the label tag, same as before, but this time we're going to put it after the form item. So we could do that, or if you wish, like I said, you could keep it before the form item as well. So it's completely up to you, whatever you want to be doing. So I think I'll keep it after the form item, and there you go, HTML. If I want to, I can now come in here and add another checkbox, and in doing this I can say, let's see, CSS, and perhaps the label will say CSS. And I'll do the same thing. That's going to be after. You can see that these elements are in line. They appear right next to each other. Now, maybe I'll just add one last one. And I'll say jQuery for my ID, but I will say jQuery here with a capital Q for my label. Now I've got those elements in place. Now if I wanted to, as you can see, I could go into the code view, and you'll notice that I could also have positioned something right at the top. I could have said, instead of just writing these elements the way they are, perhaps I want to have what are the interests and why have people come to this particular website. So if I did so, I could just come in here and say interests. But I'll need to wrap it around something. Otherwise, as you'll see, it's just going to be right here. Now that's fine. It's still in a paragraph, remember. But if I wanted to, I could just put a little line break here. So let me put a colon first, and then I'll press Shift Return. And when you're in Design View and you press Shift Return, you might remember that that creates a BR tag. And there we are with our BR tag. So that's my little bit of checkbox that I'm working with. And I'm going to press Return. And then after that, I'm going to insert, this time we'll try a radio group. Instead of just one radio button, let's create a radio group. Now, what's the difference between checkboxes and radio groups? Well, checkboxes can be checked off, and you can check off more than one. Radio groups, on the other hand, are really about whether or not you're making a yes or no choice. So there's only one option when you're working with radio groups. You can check one little radio button, but that's it. So let's give this the name newsletter. As in, do you want to sign up for the newsletter? And here we're going to write out the word yes, and the radio value will be yes. And here we'll say no with a value of no. And again, we're going to have the option of laying out using line breaks, BR tags. I think that's the best thing for us. So I'll click on that portion, and as you can see, it says yes or no. If I go to my code view, we can see that there is the option yet again. But much like I did with the other thing, the interests, I'm going to come in here and say sign up for newsletter. Put a colon on that, and look, even in the code view, if I press Shift and Return, it's going to put a little BR there for me. So you'll see that this one, when you're doing it in groups like that, it's going to wrap the label around the actual object itself. So you see here it says yes and no and stuff like that. So if you didn't want it that way, you could always just take this, Command X, and I could position it right here. We'll have it before, and I'll take this, Command X or Control X on a PC, and I can paste that there. If we put in our BRs, I don't think I need these extra BRs here. Dreamweaver sometimes goes a little bit overboard and is a little overzealous in certain instances. So I've got the label and the inputs written in this fashion, and if we look at that, you can still see that, well, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to and looks the way we want it to at this point. However, a couple of things we still need to do in that area as well. So these things are looking pretty good, and as you can see, when you select one of these in the properties window, there's a lot of information. Do you want this checked or unchecked? What's the value? You can apply a class. Perfect. Same thing with these. Do you want it checked or unchecked? Right now I'll just leave it unchecked, but let's say yes, I want to sign up for the newsletter, and you want to kind of force them to do that. Just have it there as a default for checked. However, I'm going to leave it unchecked. I think it's better to let the audience make that decision instead of us. So then I'm going to press my return key, and one of the last things I'm going to do is to introduce a button. But the buttons that you'll see here, as you can see, they look like a button and does what it's supposed to, but when I click on it, it's going to give me the ID and labels and the other information that I need. It says no label tag, so that's fine. And if I were to give this an ID and I just call it, contact, And you'll notice that here, if I click OK, it just gives me a submit. I didn't put in a label, so there's nothing to put before this or anything like that. Now, it doesn't look like it's styled, and you might be wondering, well, here we see that it's not, in fact, a button tag. Now, the button tag that I've been using in the other examples has been one that is more recent than the input tag. So, I think what I would do is to replace this input with my own button tag. So why don't we come back and we'll do that in the next video as we begin styling all of our form elements.